This bill, although there are some positive aspects to it, is not a solution to the housing crisis and indeed, in my opinion, unfortunately, will significantly intensify the crisis because the solutions proposed therein, by and large, are not based on evidence and are not based on any comprehensive analysis of the causes of the existing crisis, which amounts to a national emergency. Without a proper analysis, we are proceeding down the same road that has caused the crisis without learning any lesson. Indeed, while further reducing the power of local authorities in planning matters and in the provision of social or affordable housing, an issue which is extremely serious of itself and a matter I will return to, we are doing so in response to submissions, lobbying from powerful sectors in the country, and in further reliance on the principle or philosophy that the free market will provide, a principle or a policy that not only has utterly failed us and failed to provide homes, and I use the word homes, for our people, but it is a policy which has caused the crisis in the first place. And as I sit here and listened over the other days of the debate, I note the narrative that's been shaped. And it's certainly not been shaped in my name to say that it is the local authorities or the bad planners or Bord Planola or objectors or indeed An Taisce are the causes of our crisis. The causes of our crisis is simply that we did not build enough houses, that the local authority was never provided with money so that there would be a balance in the market, because we certainly need both the public and the private sector. And so then, rather than face reality, we construct a narrative to justify a bill that is a developer's charter, and even worse than that, will, as I've said, intensify the crisis. More specifically, the national housing emergency, and I call it that, and I noted Deputy Healy called it that earlier on, has arisen for many reasons. The failure by successive governments to provide funding to local authorities, amounting now to a period of almost 10 years and certainly 8 years of no money. For example, the last time that Galway City Council directly built a social house was in 2009. This is something I have repeatedly said in this chamber. The last time we built a house was 2009. We got quarterly reports on a regular basis. The fault did not lie with the planners, nor with the councillors. We bought the land, we zoned the land, we passed Part 8s, and each time we sought funding, it wasn't given. The quarterly report dated the 10th of October 2016 Minister, tells us that 4,720 households, that's somewhere between 12 and 15,000 people, are on a waiting list in Galway City going back to 2003. Interestingly, when we asked a Dáil question in relation to the up-to-date figures, the Department of Environment gave us figures for 2013. So you might just double-check what's happening in relation to figures. Now, that's the 10th of October, and those figures are rising. The second reason, in my opinion, was the failure by third-level institutions to proactively plan for and build student accommodation. And indeed, in the Bill's Digest that we got from the library, the Higher Education Authority in 2015 estimated that there was an unmet demand for 25,000 bed spaces, which was having an impact on the private rental sector. And that's certainly my experience in Galway. And those shortages, they said, were most acute in Dublin, Cork and Galway. And the National Economic and Social Council estimated that there were 9,000 student households renting in the private sector. That was in 2015. That's gone up considerably and added to the crisis. A third reason for the crisis was the systematic reduction of planning, engineering and housing staff at local authority level. The fourth reason, which I have mentioned already, the utter reliance on the private market to provide homes, which it spectacularly failed to do, but which this legislation utterly fails to recognise and acknowledge, and which will actually worsen the situation. And a further reason for the crisis is government policy, brought in by the last government, a fundamental change where no longer, if you're on a waiting list, are you entitled to a social house. A fundamental change under Labour and Fine Gael, and continued by this government. No right to a house anymore, regardless of how long you're on a list. For example, in Galway City from 2003 onwards, you're entitled simply to social housing support. And so what we have is a housing assistance payment. And people in Galway City who have been on the list since 2003 are, as we speak, or earlier today, receiving letters telling them that they have no choice but to sign up to the housing assistance payment and come off the waiting list. Now, I have highlighted this in my previous life as a local councillor and have been told by various party councillors that I was actually telling lies. And I'm repeating here, Minister, and I will be the first to say sorry if I am. I'm told, and the applicants who are receiving the letters are informed, you go on the housing assistance payment, you have no choice but to go on it, and you come off the waiting list. And the best they can do for you is put you on a transfer list. So somebody who was waited from 2003 to 2016 will now come off the waiting list. And a further reason for the crisis is that with the housing assistance payment, we have forced more and more people into an unregulated private rental market with absolutely no security of tenure. And then into this frame came NAMA. And if I just take it locally in Galway City, I haven't seen one single social dividend. In fact, I see a hotel empty, which was known as the Great Southern, with a convention centre and many, many bedrooms, has remained scandalously empty next door to the GMIT, while the GMIT struggle to provide accommodation for its students, and while we have a housing crisis. And that hotel, which was owned by the government up to 2007, has remained scandalously empty. Equally, the Anglo-Irish Bank has remained empty. Equally, the accommodation, the commercial accommodation beside the private bus station remained empty for a very long time and was sold in the last number of years to developers, as was the Great Southern, and a mystery surrounds the Anglo-Irish Bank. And so, Minister, one has to ask oneself, how could we have all of this empty commercial building, empty hotels, while we have people sleeping on the streets of Galway and throughout the country? And there is no escape that the reason for that is, as Deputy Mick Wallace said, ye have sold your souls, if there are any souls left on that side of the House, to neoliberalism. Without a doubt, Minister, that is what has happened. And then the land aggregation scheme, which was brought in by a previous government, I think Fianna Fáil, and then pushed by the last government, and has become a complete mystery. No mention at all of where this land is or has gone to. Obviously, physically, it still remains in all the counties, but the legal ownership has been transferred to a body in Dublin. No mention of that. How many acres of residential zoned land exists somewhere in a body in Dublin? No mention of it anywhere. Significantly, this bill and the government talk about providing housing units and not about the provision of homes and communities. This bill fails to integrate its proposals in any meaningful way with existing policies. For example, integrated public transport policies, smart travel, and an absolute failure to come back before us with an analysis of what land is owned by the City Council still in Galway and all other local authorities, and how much land is under this mysterious land aggregation scheme. We have significantly reduced the powers of local authorities, leaving them with only a consultative role. We have undermined the value of the public consultation process in relation to the city or county development plans. And most significantly, we have reduced the role of the public in the planning process, notwithstanding that repeated judges have pointed out that the public's role in the process is crucial and that they are the eyes and ears for the local authorities in relation to planning transgressions. And indeed, they've gone so far as to refer to the public as part of the Trinity: the public, the developer, applicant and the local authority. And what you're doing in this bill is to exclude them even further. I welcome the fact that you haven't changed the €20. I deplore the fact that you didn't take the opportunity to do away with the €20 and to actively encourage our citizens to take part in the planning process. In relation to the Irish Planning Institute, I note their concerns, and they wrote to the Minister, and I fully share those concerns, and I'll briefly outline some of them. They say, in relation to the pre-application discussion at local level, it's unclear how the discussion and decision-making at board level will operate in practice. They point out that the proposal, as I've said, further removes communities from their local authority and their development plan. This, combined with the stated aim of reducing the use of oral hearings, is also of concern to the Planning Institute, particularly in light of Ireland's obligation under the United Nations Economic Commission for the Convention on Access to Information, Public Participation, etc., known as the Aarhus Convention, which the government refused to sign for a very long time, finally signed up to it, and now is absolutely ignoring it. And that clearly states that it's vital that we encourage rather than reduce public engagement and community involvement at all stages of the planning process. They talk about the danger of overemphasising the provision of numbers or housing units and the danger of repeating mistakes of the past. And they point out that it's not a numbers game. We should be talking about the creation of homes and communities. And as I've already mentioned, they refer to the failure to integrate with existing transport policies. They point out that the planning system cannot and should not be made the scapegoat for the failures in the housing market. They also point out that the lack of evidence in relation to the decision to move planning applications for 100 houses units plus, there is absolutely no evidence that the moving of that to Bord Pleanála will speed up the process. In desperation, it emphasises the need to ensure that planning authorities and the Bord Pleanála are adequately staffed. And indeed, I've noted down the bottom that a survey carried out by the Irish Planning Institute indicated that the number of planners in planning authorities decreased by 1/3 between 2006 and 2015. Your bill proposes to make cheaper finance available from the Housing Finance Agency to third-level institutions. And you might clarify, is that just third-level universities, or does that also apply to the technology sector? And this, obviously, is to meet what I've already outlined because of the 25,000 bed spaces and unmet demand. However, my concern with this is that it's a good idea to provide cheaper finance to build student accommodation. And two things occur to me in relation to that. There's absolutely no condition imposed on that in relation to ensuring that accommodation for students is at an affordable level, number one. And it's amazing how we can certainly provide cheaper finance to build student accommodation, but we can't do that for the ordinary citizen who wants to build a home. In relation to the change to moving orders for possession in specific cases to the District Court, I note thresholds concerns that this amendment will speed up the process of securing vacation of dwellings. And so, while it might be a welcome development in terms of efficiency or cheaper, it will have the most unfortunate effect of having more people homeless. The security of tenure I welcome in the limited way that it has come, and I welcome the change that the 20 units is down to 5. However, it goes nowhere near giving security of tenure. In a market where government policy, with successive governments, has forced more and more people into the private renter sector. And going back, dated November the 16th in the Bill's Digest, they quote Daft, "This is the highest ever recorded rate of rental inflation, 11.7%. It's actually gone up more since." And so my concluding comments, Minister. The utter failure to analyse the reasons behind the housing crisis and this bill will absolutely intensify the housing crisis. The city and county development plans will be utterly in danger and under threat. The fast-tracking of applications is not based on evidence and, in my opinion, is unnecessary without evidence being put before us. And I'm going to conclude by referring to a letter that I've just got. I won't read any names, but just to bring home what I've said in a more personal fashion. My own personal story is that my wife and 2 small children live I won't say where, and we've been renting for 7 years and have been recently furnished with a rent review with an increase from, I'm quoting straight from the letter, they're facing a rent review with an increase from €1,100 to €1,500 without any consultation. This person is a professional, I won't identify them, and his wife is a trainee professional. We were struggling at the original rent with childcare, high taxes, travel, and now we are again living with fear and uncertainty as we can in no way afford this. The rents around Galway have rocketed and we simply cannot afford them. I fear that we will be out on the streets. This is having a huge effect on us both mentally and physically. I won't go on with the rest of the letter. It's not my way to read out personal letters, but I think it's important at this point to try and personalise the many facts that I've outlined here. And I'm not sure if it's worth appealing to you or appealing to the government to stop and pause and begin to ask questions as to what actually caused the housing crisis. Stop scapegoating, stop telling a narrative to suit your own purposes. And really learn, we're not here to be negative. I am not here to condemn a government. I'm here to highlight issues, and one of them is housing. And I've watched it worsen and worsen since my original my election in 1999, which is 17 years ago. And my first speech in 1999 was in relation to the rising cost of houses. And that rising cost has continued unabated in the 17 years, unfortunately. And I'm going to repeat, at the risk of boring you, Minister, that the major reason for that is the utter failure of the local authorities to build houses in Galway and throughout the country because of the utter failure of governments to provide funding. And I do not accept the reasoning given that it was too expensive or you didn't have the money, because all of that time you gave money under various schemes to private landlords. Under the rent supplement, which was supposed to be temporary, which has now become the housing assistance payment, which is permanent, and in Galway City, applicants are told it's the only game in town. So all of the time the governments had money, but chose to use that money to go straight into the private market. And I'll finish by saying I'm not here to demonise landlords either. They have an important role to play in the provision of social housing, affordable housing and rented accommodation. However, that always has to be balanced by direct provision from the government through the local authorities. And instead of bypassing them, you should be resourcing them to build on the land that they purchased at huge costs. Thank you very much, Alice.
Thank you very much, Deputy Connolly. Now, Minister.